Welcome back to the debrief. I'm Diane Macedo. We are taking a look at those devastating wildfires out west. We're looking at nearly 80 people dead, over 1,000 people unaccounted for as firefighters are still trying to fight these fires. The one up north, the Camp Fire, is the deadliest in state history, and you can take a look at some of the damage there. Meteorologist Dan Peck is here with me. And Dan, we have just seen image after image of people who haven't been able to go home yet, but when they get there, they have no home actually to get back to. And it's not just the people who are directly in the fire zone that are suffering the repercussions. This is a shot of San Francisco, and you can actually see how bad the air quality is. See how bad the air quality is. That's not something we get to say very frequently. Dan, talk a little bit, if you can, about what we're seeing here and why it's so bad.
Well, Diane, the poor air quality and the smoke across, it's really a statewide issue now. The weather pattern has encased all of California in this thick smoke and overall a stagnant air pattern. If we take a look at one of the overall patterns that we had in place over the west, we did have offshore winds blowing from the Rocky Mountains off towards the Pacific coast, the Santa Ana winds, as we call them in Southern California, but this was also something persistent in Northern California. And basically what that did was it took the winds and blew them from inland areas towards the coast. It blew right over the Camp Fire, right over the Woolsey Fire, and overspread some of the largest population centers on the West Coast. So that encased the area with that really thick smoke, the poor air quality, and for about a week to 10 days, nothing was in the atmosphere to really blow it in any sort of other direction. So that's why they've been stuck with it, but there is some good news on the way, at least in that sense.
And so what are they hoping for here? The winds to change and sort of get that dirty air out of the area? Is it that simple?
Yeah, it is actually that simple. We do have a big pattern change occurring as we head towards now the Thanksgiving week. So we're going to have two systems back-to-back moving in. It's going to bring rain, which is good news for the fires that are still burning. It's going to help clear out the air. And then the overall pattern is it's actually the winds are going to move from the Pacific Ocean inland. So that's going to now blow the smoke out of those areas. It's going to help put out the fires. So in terms of the air quality and the smoke, it's a good news that we're seeing this weather pattern change.
And then in terms of the fires themselves, I mean, when we're talking about, there actually are a number of fires going, but the two main ones are the Camp Fire up north and the Woolsey Fire down south. What is it that is fueling these fires that's making them so difficult to fight and cause so much damage?
So this is typically now the brunt of wildfire season for California, but two things that we saw were the really dry conditions in Northern California. Leading up to the Camp Fire, there were some of the driest periods on record in terms of the leading few weeks. So the ground was very dry, the vegetation was very dry, and when we had those winds picking up, it led to explosive fire growth. In the south, they had the Santa Ana winds. So we had the gusty winds, we have really dry conditions in place, so all you needed was something to ignite it, and those fires exploded and unfortunately had devastating impact.
And when you're talking about all you need is something to ignite it, that's one of the big questions. Every time we see a big fire, everyone wants to know, how did it start? How did it start? I mean, how small does that thing have to be to ignite a fire like that in these conditions?
I mean, when we're seeing these critical to extremely critical conditions in California, it's almost like you're pouring gasoline on, you're starting a fire with gasoline. It's that explosive. When you have any sort of a spark, it's a cigarette butt, it could be really anything that gets that fire going, and it's gonna grow and spread rapidly.
All right, well, because of all that air quality, we have actually seen schools closing classes across the state, but one thing that hasn't been closed is California's farmland, and we know there's quite a bit of it. Farm workers are out there working in these conditions, and that's sparking some worries. Heriberto Fernandez of United Farm Workers of America is with us talking about that. And Heriberto, what kind of conditions are these farm workers facing right now?
Thank you. And we should all know that farm workers are already working under some of the most dangerous, backbreaking, physically demanding work. And this is another layer. The fires are another layer to that. Farm workers are constantly being berated by so many different environmental catastrophes, whether it's high heat conditions or high windy, cold temperatures. Now these fires are adding to an already dangerous, backbreaking, difficult work.
I mean, we're looking at photos right now of people working with masks. What other kinds of precautions are they and their bosses trying to take to preserve their safety?
So under California law, employers are required to provide as much help to their workers as possible. They're required to provide any sort of protective personal equipment that they need. In this case, workers should be receiving high-grade breathable masks so that they can wear in the fields as they're working. But as you know, because work is so hard and so dangerous and it's very fast-paced, that these masks actually interfere with the work in the fields.
And how so?
Well, these masks, although they're meant to prevent people from inhaling toxic fumes and toxic air, what it really does, it doesn't really allow for farm workers to continue to be as productive as they could be in otherwise normal circumstances. And so when farm workers are asked to wear these masks, it really doesn't really help them it doesn't really help them do their job.
So if the masks that are meant to preserve their safety, you say they don't want to, it sounds like you're saying they don't want to wear them because it's going to slow them down. What's your recommendation?
Well, under United Farm Worker contracts, we see that there are companies that would actually shut down and provide employees with paid time off. That would be ideal for any employer in agriculture. But unfortunately, most companies don't allow for these benefits. So oftentimes you see these underpaid workers forced to have to work under these unfortunate circumstances for several reasons. Because they're so underpaid, they're sort of forced to keep working under the same conditions. And because they're not really protected by, they're not really protected employees, they're afraid of being blacklisted, or they don't want to be not allowed to come back to work if they decide to skip the day. So a lot of these farm workers will come back to work by the employer's request if they're asked to, but they don't feel empowered enough to say, no, I'm not going to continue working.
And, Roberta, we also reached out to OSHA in California, who oversees sort of the general landscape of what's going on there. And, they did explain that for them, they do send out advisories to employees and the workers to try to let them know when situations like this occur, if the air quality is unsafe, and so on and so forth. But we did ask about action being taken, and they made clear that they sort of rely on complaints to be made first for them to come in and get involved. We asked them if they've received any complaints about these notes, and they said they would have to look into that. So if so, it doesn't sound like they've received very many if they still have to look into that at the moment.
Yeah, and there's so many reasons for why that is. Number one, most farm workers in the country are working, unfortunately, are undocumented. So there's this big fear of government agencies and contacting them to begin with. Another thing, too, is most farm workers don't know who to call. So they rely on local organizations. They rely on United Farm Workers to be the conduit to this information. And there's severe underreporting on behalf of farm workers to these agencies. They're not going to call in to file a complaint. There just isn't enough information for them to do that. But at the very least right now, employers should be requiring every employee to wear protective gear.
All right. Well, hopefully by putting this out there, we are helping at least a little bit. These are the people making the food that we need to eat. Hopefully their bosses are seeing to it, and they are seeing to it that they are doing so safely. Roberto from the United Farm Workers of America, we appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.
And now we want to go over to Agoura Hills, where the area is finally expecting some much needed rain, as Dan mentioned. However, that rain is also coming with a risk. Carlos Granda is in Agoura Hills, California, in the Malibu area. Carlos, sort of explain the good and the bad here.
Well, the rain is welcome in a way because this is always needed here since we're always in a drought, it appears, in Southern California. But after these fires, it's really bad news to have this rain. If it's heavy rain, if it's just a light rain, the mountains will be able to deal with it. But if it's heavy rain, you could expect some mudslides. And that's what people here are preparing for. You can see here they're getting sandbags ready. This is volunteers from a local high school, and they've come here to fill sandbags for anyone from the community who wants to get them to just come and pick them up. And that's the problem with the mountains here, these hills. when it's any kind of rain, you're going to expect some mudslides, rock slides. That's what happened a year ago in Montecito when we had those horrible mudslides. And look, if we just pan over a little bit, you can see the hills right here, right on the other side of the freeway here, which is Highway 101, the 101 freeway that we call it. And you can see the hillsides there burned. Now, if it's a heavy rain, maybe like as much as an inch an hour, you can expect mudslides there and in places around homes. If it's less than that, hopefully, then the mountains can absorb the water and they won't have mudslides. That's what we're praying for. But we really don't know what to expect because Mother Nature, who knows what she can do to us.
Absolutely. We've learned that the hard way one too many times, Carlos. And I just wonder, are there any other precautions being taken at this point aside from the sandbags to try to protect from this if it does happen?
Well, normally what some cities do is they'll put up these K-rails on the sidewalks, but they need time to do that because you have to bring in heavy equipment to move these very heavy cement K-rails to block sidewalks and to try to channel mud down, away from homes. But that takes a lot of planning. This happened just the other day, the fires, and within 2 or 3 days now they have to prepare for rains. They don't have time to do that, although cities are cleaning out some of the areas where the mud usually flows into. There's some channels that they can clear out of debris so hopefully the mud can go in there and not affect homes. But again, since this is happening so quickly, it's been a 1-2 punch with those fires that literally today, I think, is when they're finally getting them completely under control. And now they have to prepare for the rain. So they haven't had much of a chance to do that. So the only thing they really have are these sandbags, and that's what they're going to be doing. Residents themselves are just getting these sandbags, placing them around their homes, trying to divert the mud away from homes, and that's really all they can do right now since this is happening so quickly after the fires.
And Carlos, you're from the area, so you're not used to this kind of thing necessarily, but you have seen things like this before. How does this fire and this situation and now this mudslide risk compare to some of the fire issues we've seen previously?
Well, it's frightening because every year we say the same thing. We've never seen something like this before. We said that last year with the fires in Montecito near Santa Barbara, where the fires there destroyed so many homes, and then the mudslides literally brought these boulders the size of vehicles down the hill, so much destruction, and that was the worst we'd ever seen. Now this fire is the worst we've seen here in Southern California. It seems every year they're getting worse, and that's what's so scary is because so much area was devastated by these fires that we're very worried that these mudslides could also be worse than they were last year, and last year was incredible mudslides that we had that caused so much destruction.
No, we're certainly hoping did not see a repeat of that. Carlos Grant in Agoura Hills, California. Carlos, give our thanks to the students behind you too who are working hard to try to help the community, and thank you for great reporting. We appreciate it.
Yep.
And I want to bring back meteorologist Dan Peck on this. Dan, you heard Carlos saying that every year we say, we've never seen anything like it, this is the worst we've ever seen, and then it feels like every year we're retopping that in a way we obviously don't want to be. Why is that?
Well, we're seeing a lot of factors at play. One of the biggest ones I think that is making these recent fires so compelling are where they're burning. When we start to report about fires that are, exploding in California, people think about the acres, but it's also where they're burning. These hit populated areas in Southern California, areas where we had lots of homes, lots of development. So we saw that really immediate destruction. But we're also seeing an overall pattern in California where it's not as much temperature. Temperature is a factor, but it's just that they've been very dry. We're always, like he said, we're always talking about drought. We're always talking about dry conditions. We get those winds, the dry conditions, and we see those fires exploding.
But now the rain is on the way, which you would think everyone's saying, yay, rain. And to some degree they are. This does bring a lot of good news to those trying to fight these fires. However, the fire creates issues with the ground, which then makes it vulnerable to mudslides.
Yeah, once you get to a heavier rainfall, particularly it looks like this time around in Northern California, basically what happened was these wildfires changed the composition of the soil. So those charred mountains now are basically now a water repellent layer. So once that rain falls on it, instead of it going into the ground and getting soaked up, when we get these heavier rainfall rates, that rain now is just going to run off the mountain. It's going to create debris flows, possibly mudslides. It has nowhere else to go, so it's going to go down the hill.
And does that create a flooding risk as well?
It does. It also increases the threat of flash flooding. And I should mention, not just for these recent fires, all the fires that we've seen in the last few years, They're still recovering. There's a lot of burned land. So wherever those areas are, it doesn't have to be in just these 2 fires. We have that increased risk for flooding and mudslides.
And is there anything they can be doing right now to try to prepare for this?
There's really not much you can do. Once the land has burned, you really just need the natural process to take over. And unfortunately, that takes years for that to happen.
Right. Well, unfortunately, the people of California don't have that. So, Dan, what can we look forward to? Because I know a lot of this will depend on how heavy that rainfall is, how much rain they get.
I think the big thing first will be we have the rain moving into California early on Wednesday. It's going to, first of all, clear the air out, which is going to be good news for so many communities. Then we're going to get the rain initially being, probably wrapping up the containment on the fires right along the West Coast and then moving into inland locations. Something else I wanted to mention, too, is this weather pattern change when we start to get the winds pushing off the Pacific Ocean and this overall change. It's going to get colder, too. So that's actually something else to bring up while we have the rain and the mudslide risk. Anyone that doesn't have a home or in some of those tent communities, in shelters, it's actually going to get chilly. We could have snow in the Sierra Mountains in about 48, 72 hours.
And
so they might have to deal with that,
So
too.
many people are displaced right now and out of their homes. And like you said, some of them living in tents, that actually could pose a pretty big problem for that area.
Yep.
All right, Dan Peck, meteorologist with ABC. We appreciate it. And thank you to all of the correspondents and reporters out there in the field who are helping us keep an eye on this just absolute disaster, hoping for good news for California as this rain comes in. In the meantime, don't forget, you can check your headlines all day long at abcnews.com or at your ABC News app. We, of course, will continue to keep you updated as we get more. But for now, that does it for us here at ABC News Live. Thanks for watching, everyone. Stay safe.